Well, hello everybody and welcome back to another DTF video. Today's video, I'm going to be showing you all how to use this autopilot system. We're going to be covering all of these, how they're used, and we're also going to be flying an ILS and showing you how the approach mode works. This is not going to be an ILS tutorial though. I'll post another one of those later, but we will be flying one and showing you how to use the autopilot in that scenario. Let's get into it. So today we're going to be flying a flight from here in Love Field down to Austin, I think it is. And we're going to be using the autopilot the entire way except for takeoff and landing. The approach will all be autopilot. And I'm going to show you how we use the autopilot to go off of my pre-planned flight plan, which I'm going to do right now. Okay, so as you guys can see, I've now programmed the entire flight plan, and I will now, during flight, I'll use this button. It's called nav. It's the nav mode of the autopilot, and it's pretty much telling the plane, follow this little line or needle here, this magenta line, into the runway. What that will not do is it will not travel through my altitudes. I will have to set my altitudes as I fly that I've just pre-programmed into here. It will not follow these. So what I'll have to do is I'll just automatically go in and switch those with my V speed, which I will show you guys how to do. Now what we'll do is we'll taxi out to the runway and we'll take off. One thing you want to make sure you do before taking off is set your heading bug to the heading of the actual runway. So in my case it is 130. So I'll come down here and I'll use this thing. It's called HDG. I'll set this to 130. Okay, so now I've set it to 130. So in case of an emergency or you have to immediately switch on the autopilot, you can just switch on the heading bug so it'll keep flying straight. You would then select altitude, which would then keep the plane straight and level. And that will also come on once you V-speed automatically gets to the altitude. I will also show you guys that. What I'm also going to do right now is I'm going to set my altitude for the flight. So today's flight, it's about 150 nautical miles to our first waypoint. Should give us enough time. We'll probably cruise at about 8,000 feet. So this little one right here on the heading, this is in hundreds of feet. This big one is in thousands. So I'll just move that to 8,000. Guys, here we are ready for takeoff. We're gonna go ahead and take off now. I'm gonna show you how I activate the autopilot after takeoff, because I'm not gonna activate it right away. I'm gonna give it some time before activating it. So right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try, it's very windy here. There's 13 knots of wind pushing from this direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to angle the nose in that way so we kind of keep even with the runway. Because what we want to do is we want to stay somewhat above the runway, heading the same direction as the runway. So we stay safe from other traffic around the airport. And it's just regular rules. You don't want planes flying around over the airport a lot. Also have to clear above 500 feet before you can turn off of the runway. So as you can see, we're still above the runway here, so we just have to keep holding this, and I'm just going to keep hand flying it. So there's this little needle in this compass here. What we want to do is after we clear this, which we just did, I'm going to turn the plane to start getting closer and closer to heading in the direction of that needle. This is going to start moving once we get in more range of it. And that's our flight path. Now I'm gonna hand fly it until I have a good sense of what's happening with that, until I trust the autopilot to take over. So you guys can now see that needle start to move. So I'm kind of rotating the plane and turning it more lined up with the heading of the flight path. So then that needle is coming in a bit slowly. But now that the flight path is kind of really close to us, I can now activate nav mode. But just because I've activated nav mode, it hasn't done anything. First, I have to hit the autopilot button. So now the autopilot's taken over. I'm gonna hit the vertical speed button. Let me do this down here instead of by myself. So autopilot button is right here, so that's turned on. Then I'm gonna hit this button, nav mode. So now the autopilot has started to take over and follow this. Then I'm gonna hit the V speed button, and I'm gonna select up as far as I want. So maybe I only want it to climb at 800 feet per minute. As soon as you activate that nav mode, it's gonna start climbing at whatever vertical speed you are already at, which was 900 feet in my case. Okay, everybody, we're getting a bit closer to our next waypoint. Our next waypoint is in 23.3 nautical miles. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start descending to this 5,000 foot. So how I'm gonna do that is I'm just gonna change this altitude selector. See right here when I change it. I'm gonna change that till it says 5,000 there. Then we're gonna come here and I'm gonna say V speed on. And I just want to nose down pretty slightly, about 500 feet. Now, you see when I start to nose down, my airspeed goes up. So what I want to do is I actually want to pull the throttle out of it. So it's not speeding up that much, but we're still descending. That's something you want to do corresponding to each other when you start lowering the nose more. So say I put this down at 800 feet. I'm just going to pull the throttle out a bit more. It's just something you should be doing side to side. If I'm going to start changing the altitude and the vertical speed, I should also start changing the throttle and how much power is actually being put in based on how much needs to be put in. Okay, one thing just to point out real quick is now that we're coming in on this 5,000 feet, the V speed will turn off and now it turns to outs. Outs is it pretty much just says like a straight and level kind of thing. It's just kind of holding the altitude where it is. Now you can manually do that by pushing the out button on the autopilot display, or it does it automatically once the V speed closes in on it. Now we have about 11 nautical miles until our next waypoint, so I'll just go ahead and sit tight and get back with you guys once we get there, and then I'll show you the full approach from there into the airport. Okay guys, we've just hit that first waypoint now. What we're gonna do, this is automatically switched to 4,000, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna manually switch it down here to 4,000. Then we're just gonna simply V speed down. We have about 3 nautical miles till we get there. So we're gonna pick up the pace a bit, go about 800 feet per minute, and just remember to pull that throttle down. Okay guys, we can already kind of see those runways of Austin start to come into view. We do have a pretty strong wind coming in for our landing today though, so we will just have to be cautious of that. Now I'm just gonna keep moving these altitudes down like I've showed you guys how to do during this approach, and then I'll kind of come back to you guys when it's time to turn on that approach mode. I'm gonna give a little warning about the approach mode here. The approach mode, if you're new to Microsoft Flight Simulator, you do not know this. The approach mode is not a auto land button. It does not land the plane for you. It does not just work. You cannot just fly towards an airport or runway and hit the approach mode. That is not how it works. The approach mode is going to be working off these different waypoints I've set in my autopilot to then help you land. It's going to follow your autopilot more directly. It's kind of like your nav mode. It's going to follow that nav, but it's actually going to follow a localizer and the altitude. What you want to do is you want to follow the approach mode into the runway until you have a good visual of it, or until you just want to take over. Then you fly the plane. It's only usually worked in, say, a VNAV situation. I'm not too familiar with those, or like RNAV, sorry, or an ILS. Now, right now we're flying an ILS, which is a type of approach I've loaded in during the flight plan. These are not automatically loaded in. You load them in. So this does not work. If you want to see an ILS tutorial, there's one with a TBM, I think I said that right, 930, I think is what it is in the Microsoft Flight Sim, up on my channel of how to do an ILS if you want to see that. And then we'll be doing another one shortly on these other types of planes. Okay, so now we're coming up on that 600, 1600 right here. Keep that V speed on. Alright, it's gonna keep setting. We're actually gonna increase the V speed here. So now what I just did is I hit the CDI button. It switched to the localizer. Now we're locked on the localizer. Now we're getting a bit closer. Once we get a bit closer into this waypoint, I can actually go ahead and select that approach mode. So right now the plane's still flying off of nav mode, but what approach mode will do is it'll fly more off of the localizer than this. So we'll go ahead and select that approach mode if I can find it. Okay, right here. So now it's going to be following, it's ignoring what I'm saying. So if I have V speed or whatever, it's ignoring that. It's just doing what it knows how to do. You can see not much changed because we're already pretty good on the glide slope. But the plane's fine itself, so now we just have to start getting it ready for landing, as in landing lights and beacon are set on. And we'll slow the plane a bit so we can start putting some flaps down. Okay, 110, go ahead and set flaps 1. And then at 85 knots, we can go ahead and select flaps full, or flaps 2 and flaps full. So as you can see, that approach has us right on with those lights right there. And it's keeping us with this diamond. It says GS. That GS stands for glide slope. Glide slope means it's like a picture, like a little triangle with the runway. I'll put a picture in for you, but a glide slope is kind of like it's like the correct approach or angle going into the runway. Okay, now the approach mode is following straight to runway 18 left, which is right there. Okay, now we're slowing through 85 knots or so. So we won't put the flaps down quite yet. Right now the plane's fighting pretty hard to kind of keep on that glide slope for us. I'm just trying to provide it with enough power in order to do that. It's really struggling here with the wind. That's why I'm trying not to take over, because it's actually doing a better job than I probably would be right now. So I'm not gonna take over quite yet, but you can technically take over whenever, as long as you can see the runway within the minimums or before the minimums. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take over now, and I'm gonna slow the plane down a bit because we're coming in a bit fast here. It's my fault. Okay, so now you can see those lights. They were a bit low, but this plane's float a bit, so it's actually good to come in a bit low. So we'll actually end up landing maybe a bit long here. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. Try to stay on that center line a bit more, but say okay. Looks like we can pull off here. Yeah, we can make it. Alright. So I hope that all makes sense to you guys, and if you want me to make other tutorials and other types of autopilots, maybe airliner like the A320 autopilot, be happy to do that. The TBM also has unique autopilot, but I just like to point out all of these features I've just talked about work the same in those other planes. They're just operated differently or set up differently, or the same. So if you guys like this, don't forget to leave a like and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep the blue side up.